Welcome again to another episode of In This Family, where I have in-depth conversations with fascinating people about mental health, family, the past, and the future. I'm Dr. Michelle K. Murray, President and CEO of Nexus Family Healing, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and your host. In This Family is presented by Nexus Family Healing, a national nonprofit mental health organization who helps youth and families heal from trauma and complex mental health challenges. We believe every child is worth it and every family matters. Family, those people who formed you, who built in those strengths and vulnerabilities, and sometimes presented you with issues you might need to deal with later on in life. That's what our show is about, and that's what this week's episode is about. Marie Cox is a writer, journalist, podcaster, and political pundit. Anna founded the political blog Wonkette and has written for the New York Times, The Guardian, The Daily Beast, and many other publications. She co-hosts the podcast Past Due. Anna is a recovering alcoholic and has been sober for many years. She says that finding sobriety and the recovery community actually saved her life. That came about after a suicide attempt. Anna was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 2, which can involve hypomania and severe depression. Right now, Anna is at work on an upcoming memoir, and that has meant really exploring her own mental health history and that of her family. This process has given her a lot of insight, and I think it's made her stronger. I talked to Anna from her home in Austin. Welcome to In This Family, Anna. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me here.
So I thought we could start by maybe having you describe your family and your childhood.
So I'm an only child, and I am the child of an alcoholic family. My mom was an alcoholic my whole life. She died of cirrhosis. Actually, when I had 1 year sober, she died a month to the day after I had 1 year sober. My dad comes from an alcoholic and abusive family himself. They were divorced when I was grade school. And the other thing that really shaped me is that we moved every 2 years, which, as I'm sure you know, can really screw you up.
Yeah.
And especially for an only child. So yeah, that's kind of the highlights. And then the more specific areas of interest to my therapists, I guess, have to do with the fact that my mom's alcoholism. My mom was granted primary custody in the divorce. My dad, he's like a good child of an abusive home. He is in a lot of denial about a lot of things. And to this day, he claims he had no idea how bad my mom's drinking was. But he left Texas. I was here in Texas with my mom, and he left to go teach at University of Nebraska. And her drinking just became really bad. Drinking every night, passing out every night, or not coming home. I was 13. And also, she let me drink at home. And I didn't really realize how screwed up that was for many years. Like, I knew it was screwed up, right? But one of the things I think I didn't realize was that was a period of my life. I was 13 or 14, but I so didn't want to be like her that I actually kind of controlled my own drinking. And then what would happen is she would pass out, and then my friends would come over and we'd raid the liquor cabinet and go someplace else. But at some point, my dad he says he had an idea that things were bad because my grades had really started to slip. And so he called me, and I remember it was a night she wasn't there. He called, and I remember being on the phone and him saying, "How'd you like to come live with me?" And it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders, like choose your metaphor, a lifeline thrown to me, because like my dad can be a heavy drinker, but he was not like a compulsive alcoholic, right? And I knew things were bad. I'd always been a straight A kid, always been a gold star girl. And I remember looking at a test at one point, it was my 9th grade year, and seeing like a C or a D and being like, oh, so this is what it feels like. Like, this is what it feels like to get a D on a test. Interesting. Interesting how that happens. And I think it's probably the only way he would have known something was off, right? And so I went to go live with him, and in Nebraska, I will say, high school starts in 10th grade. So I remember him telling me, this is your shot. Like, everyone's going to be new. No one's going to have any idea what you were like in 9th grade. So I'm living in Nebraska, getting back to my roots of being straight A's. And I did actually get caught drinking a couple of times, but because my grades were so good, my dad was kind of like, well, scolding, but gonna get in trouble next time. I don't think he had any idea, to be honest, that like he had a little future alcoholic going. Then what happened was at the end of my 10th grade year, my mom and I were on the phone, and she said, I was telling her what I was up to, and she said, well, that's going to be really hard to leave behind. And I was like, I said, what are you talking about? And she said, well, as your father and I discussed, when you come back and live with me. And I said, actually, I think I didn't say anything. I just handed the phone to my dad. He told me later that he had never told her that I would come back, that was her invention, that he had told her explicitly, it's very unlikely she's going to want to come back. And then I guess to the thing that we maybe will talk more about is that my mom never forgave me.
We will come back to that because I think that that's really important. And, you described your mom's alcoholism and your dad's as being a little different. So can you describe the differences between how they each managed alcohol?
So my mom was eventually a daily heavy drinker. Most of my life, she was a daily drinker, but not always a heavy drinker, I would say. Although she, like when I talked to my parents' friends from way back in my family, she was I think a much heavier drinker and known for her drinking more than I realized. Like, she was a party girl. I've been interviewing people for this memoir I'm working on, and I interviewed my aunt about it, and she actually told me that she worried about my safety sometimes. To which I said, why didn't you do anything? But distant aunt. So my mom was like the heavier drinker, the more daily drinker, the person who had real emotional issues around drinking. I think looking back, I have bipolar disorder. And looking back, I wonder if my mom also had some of that. I mean, I can't diagnose. You can't diagnose. We can't. No. But she was the more emotive drinker, right? And my dad was he could stay sober for long periods of time and then would get done. He's an academic, so he'd get done with the semester, get done with a book project, get done with whatever, and then have a party, basically. He wasn't a solo drinker. My mom was a solo drinker. My dad would find folks to, go get plastered with. And I will tell you, he did stop drinking. Like, he had periods in his life when he didn't drink at all, like a year or two, right? And I think when my mom and he got divorced, he stopped drinking for a while. And I remember one of my mom's friends saying, that's too bad. The only time Sam is fun is when he drinks. The thing that kind of happened with my dad that I think had bigger impact on me than drinking is his workaholism. That's where he channeled all of his disassociation. He was a very successful academic, tenure, books, department chair. That was his escape more than drinking. And that could be lonely. I felt lonely a lot as a kid.
So it seemed like his workaholic stuff affected you. Talk a little bit about your relationship with him and other impacts that might have had on your relationship.
I mean, I was just this is classic only child dysfunctional family, which is I was just super independent. I was hyper competent. I had a therapist say this once recently, and I didn't understand it at the time, which was like overly responsible. That's it. Overly responsible. And when my therapist said that, wondered, what could that possibly mean? How can you be overly responsible? Isn't it good to be responsible? How can there be a limit on responsibility? And it took me a little while to realize that what he was describing was taking responsibility for things that aren't mine
Yes.
to be responsible for. That's the clinical, that he was using in this clinical sense, and not you're so good for being responsible, which is what I heard. And when I got into recovery, relatedly, and you make a list of your personal, like your character defects, I believe it was suggested to me at one point that I might put perfectionism on there, and it didn't not compute. How could perfectionism be a character defect? Shouldn't everyone aspire to perfection? So I think that's the way that I internalized the here but not here relationship I had with my dad, who, I want to emphasize, loves me very much, supported me in a lot of different ways. But I think his withdrawal from his own family and the self-protection that gave him, and his own overachieving, if I can succeed, then I'm okay mentality, he just really passed that on to me, along with the idea that as long as I was succeeding, then I am okay. And as long as I'm getting these outward markers of success, then surely nothing can be wrong. And in some ways, I have to say, I wonder if my dad might have had more opportunities to do more work on himself if he had been less successful. Because I think that my alcoholism and my mental health issues, and even the state of journalism today, one of the things that's come out of it is the opportunity to separate whether or not I'm successful in a monetary or outward way with whether or not I'm okay.
Yeah, that's great insight. So when you talk about being overly responsible, how did you see that playing out in your family?
I think it self-contained little kid, never got in trouble. That year that my mom's drinking got really bad and I was getting bad grades was probably the first and only time in my life where I got in serious trouble. Although I did get caught drinking once. I was at a gifted and talented camp. And my then boyfriend snuck in booze and I got kicked out of the camp. And that was bad enough that my dad, I was going to go on a trip with friends that summer and he said I couldn't. So that was the most trouble I got in since the bad year with my mom. But for the most part, up until that bad year with my mom, so 0 to 13, like I can't remember getting in serious trouble.
Say more about that time, even with your mom. Some of it was while your parents were together, some was divorced, but describe that relationship with your mom.
The thing that stands out to me is how parentified I was, not just in taking care of the drinking things, but in being a confessor and a source of emotional support to my mom. When right before they got divorced, like I have memories of my mom coming into my bedroom and thinking I was asleep and like coming into my bed and holding me like a teddy bear, like crying. And me feeling very, violated.
She didn't know you were awake.
Right. But honestly, I don't think she should have done that no matter what.
Yes, yes.
That's really weird and bad.
Yeah, I agree.
And she would talk to me about troubles in her life, and I was a good, perceptive kid. It's funny. I had a 12-step meeting this morning and was talking to someone afterward who's newer in the program, and she was telling me about her alcoholic upbringing and the parentification. And when someone else tells me about it, it's so easy to see how wrong it is. At the time, I felt like, oh, she really trusts me and I am very mature for my age. This is a good thing. But it was, made it hard for me to have boundaries growing up. And honestly, I think it interfered with my ability to have relationships with kids my own age. I have now done the reading around how much moving and lack of peer support, how much damage that does to young people. That peer support is as important as family support, like having that feeling of community and having support outside your family system. And especially, I think, with unreliable parents. And they did do things like forget to pick me up from places,
Wow.
that kind of thing, or be very late. I was always the last kid that got picked up from stuff.
And when they didn't pick you up, was that because they were drinking or something else?
I don't think it was always because of drinking. I believe that it's just priorities. I had a conversation with a friend a while ago who's a woman who's old enough to be my mother, and telling her about some of this stuff and her saying, "That's awful." Did you ever you didn't feel like you were a priority in their lives? And I have to say, I didn't. It's been hard to think about this, but especially with my mom, like, I never felt like she enjoyed being a mom. That's actually when I think about why I didn't have kids, one of the reasons is, this is very vulnerable. I didn't think I'd be good at it, and I didn't wanna be a bad mom. I decided I'd rather not be a mom than be a bad mom.
What made you think that your mom didn't enjoy it?
To be honest, I can't think of a time when I felt like she enjoyed being a mom. She enjoyed me being successful. She enjoyed bragging about me, but that's very different. And if anything, informed further perfectionism and overachievement. And then when she became so upset and histrionic about my not coming back to live with her, that really burst open the relationship in a way that never got repaired.
Well, let's stay with that for a minute. So, what you were describing before is she wasn't really prepared for this idea that you weren't coming back, though that was always your plan to not come back. So, she finds out you're not coming back, and tell us what happens from there.
I don't know what the conversation with my dad was like for her, but what I do know is that for decades afterwards, it would come up.
Wow.
Why did you abandon me? Was I such a bad mother? What did I do wrong? Don't you love me?
So, it was questions all about her, not really
Yes.
questions about you.
Yes.
Do you think your mom ever recognized the impact she had on you?
My honest assessment is that she was such a heavy drinker and serious alcoholic that, and she had her own abusive childhood, to be clear. Her dad was an alcoholic. She was born in something I only recently discovered. She was born a month after her parents got married in the 1942, which back then, in a small Texas town,
Yeah.
probably led to some friction and judgment.
Yes.
And resentment.
Yeah.
I don't know if she ever felt treasured as a child, right? I think that unfortunately her pain of abandonment and her own self-pity kept her pretty stuck. I honestly, and then after she divorced my dad, she married another more active alcoholic. So they just drank. And he did not like me. So the environment was one of like the world, us against the world, in the way that alcoholic dyads can get. And I think she was never in a place where she was able to do the kind of healthy self-examination without judgment. That is something we learn in the 12-step programs, right?
Yeah.
People hear assessment of character defects and they think, oh no, like that's like some Scientology BS. where you have to tell your darkest secrets. But as you probably know, it's not supposed to be judgmental. It's supposed to be you take an inventory, you step back from who you are, and you make an honest assessment of what you have done. And you learn, in the best case scenario, I am not my actions. I am not my character defects. I can choose to act on, I can have a feeling of jealousy or self-pity, and then I can choose how I act, right? And I think she was really stuck in not being able to take that honest assessment. Like any assessment she did of herself was always, and I'm a bad person and a bad mom, and Anna must hate me, and not, how does Anna feel? I mean, you tell me what the right way to frame those questions would be, or even to just take personal responsibility of why, what have I done? What actions did I take that might have led to this result? And that has to come from a place of self-forgiveness and grace. I don't think I wanted her to beat up on herself and judge herself and think she was a bad person. I wanted her to just be my mom.
You mentioned before about being a parentified child. What did that look like for you?
After my parents got divorced, there was a lot of literally taking care of her, getting her to bed after she passed out, reminding her about things. And the continued theme would be taking care of myself, being parent to myself. I think sometimes the assumption is the parentified child is the child to the parent. But my experience was often I was the parent to myself. That's the way that I was really parentified. I was the one to make sure I got stuff signed for school, right? I was the one to make sure that I had lunch. I was the one to make sure I did my homework. I mean, I loved homework, but so it wasn't really a big deal, but I had to be responsible for myself because I couldn't trust my mom to be responsible for me. And looking back, I have a better idea of how hard things must have been for her, because I have gone through this treatment-resistant depression and how difficult functioning was.
So what do you see now?
The things that I wanted from her were impossible for her to give. I don't think she knew how to love me as a mom. And that doesn't make it hurt less. But I can be a little more generous about it and less angry. I was angry at her for a very long time. A really, really long time. We never were estranged in the formal sense that sometimes the kids talk about today, like cutting someone out of your life, going no contact. That's what they call it.
Yeah.
Except towards the end, when she was still drinking and I was in early sobriety, she would drunk dial me and want to talk when she was drunk and do some of the "you're a bad daughter. Why did you abandon me?" And this is literally the year before she died.
And how did you handle those times?
Well, I talked to my sponsor about it, and my sponsor said, block her number, don't pick up. But I would write her letters. She didn't really write back. And this was very close to the end. But before that, before I got sober, I just went long periods I wouldn't answer her calls, but it wasn't because I had gone no contact. It's just because I didn't want to talk to her. And I'd go long periods without visiting. There was never a time when we had an official, we are estranged now conversation. And I think, to me, this is much more typical than the official shun, unshun
I think
situation. You're right. And in some ways that's harder because there's no clear boundary for repair. And I don't know if I ever used the word estrangement. I just didn't like being around her.
You mentioned also that your dad realized he didn't know how bad it was. So say more about what he missed.
I think he didn't know how much I was drinking. And I think he didn't know she was letting me drink. And it was real weird. She would let my friends drink in the house because bull crap about, well, if you're drinking here, it's safer. I've heard other parents say things like that, and I've also seen studies that is you are putting someone on a path to alcoholism if you frame it that way. We went to like Cancun together once with a friend of hers, and I could not have been more than 14. I was 14 at the latest. And I remember there was a swim up bar at the hotel, and I went up and ordered a Shirley Temple, and she was like, "Oh, you can have a margarita if you want." Crazy. Crazy stuff. Stuff that you would not I remember telling my friend, the older friend who asked me about whether or not my mom enjoyed being a mom. And she said someone should have called CPS, and maybe. I don't know. I don't know. And then she also asked me, like, didn't anyone know that something was up? And I think I covered it up pretty well. Even in the times that I was getting bad grades, I don't think I ever acted out in class or looked like I was in trouble. You know, I think I just have always maintained a fairly, one of the things I learned from both my parents is if it looks okay on the outside, then must be okay.
So you started drinking when you were about 13.
Yeah.
When did you realize that you had an alcohol problem?
Oh, I was in my 30s before I realized I had a real problem. I controlled my drinking fairly successfully for many years. I was able to follow the pattern that I described with my dad, which is I could not drink for months at a time. I could have rules for myself about drinking that lasted through college and grad school. And then in my mid to late 20s, I remember the first time I had a drink on a weeknight alone at home and thinking, oh, okay, I'm breaking one of my rules. And then I don't remember a lot of the, after that, maybe the rules just fell aside pretty quickly, but I was still controlling it pretty successfully. And I knew that I loved drinking. And I knew I liked drinking more than most people. But also I was a journalist, and I lived in Washington, D.C., and I lived in New York, and those were, got cocktails and all those great journalists who are also big alcoholics. And part of me, I think, and I was also depressed a lot, but a part of me, I think, always felt like, well, you know what? Like, who cares? Like, I'll die young. A lot of the good die young. And it was never a conscious thought, but I also never saved for retirement. This is a common thing. It's come to see a common thing in the rooms. There's a lot of people who get to their middle age, and it wasn't as though we made a conscious decision that we weren't going to live to be very old, but no one saves any money. No one plans. So then in my mid 30s, things just started to fall apart. My depression got worse. I started taking Xanax in addition to alcohol and Ambien. And so, as anyone who's done that can attest, that's a bad combination. It's not and I remember at one meeting early in sobriety, I said my drugs of choice were booze and benzos, and this guy blurted out sitting next to me, "That's not a fun combination." I was like, yeah, no. That's an oblivion combination. That is, I don't want to exist. I don't want to be on this earth combination, whether that's a blackout or dying. And that was my bottom. It was a suicide attempt.
Seeing what was going on with your mom and drinking, some people might be a little naive to think, well, she watched her mom do this. Why in the world would she get herself into this? Talk a little bit about that.
Well, addiction is not a particularly logical disease. And also, there's also a term we use in recovery sometimes, terminal uniqueness. It's a perversion of thinking that makes you think you're different than everyone else. And you can do some of the same things, but it'll turn out differently for you. And I think one thing that happened for me was I saw my drinking as different than my mom's. I don't want to drink like her. No, that's disgusting. That's bad. But I will drink the way that I drink, which I did for a while. I had rules about it. I didn't drink alone. I had fun. I mean, I knew I liked drinking more than most people, but in some ways, my mom's drinking was so bad. I could use the "at least I'm not like her" excuse. And then when it became more like her, I was too far in to pull out. The spiral had gotten a hold of me.
Was there a pivotal moment in your life where you realized this has gotten bad for me?
Yeah, I have a good story, although I think that there were a lot of places where I realized getting blackouts was not normal and day drinking in secret was not normal. And then a story I tell, which is different than an actual realization, is one night I was living in DC, and I took the train from New York to Washington, and I drank a lot on the train. I remember that. Amtrak had if you took business class on Amtrak, is free wine. And I took an Uber or a limo, probably at that point, from the train station to home, which I don't super remember. I don't really remember all this trip. I know that it happened, but one of the ways I know that it happened is the next morning I got a call from the limo driver asking me wanting to make sure I was okay.
Wow.
And that was I didn't stop drinking. That wasn't, but I do remember thinking, oh, well, that doesn't happen. It was a it was not creepy because it was a female limo driver, which also is probably why she might have been extra concerned. But I recognized at that point it's not what most people, not a normal evening for most people. So, and then at some point in any alcoholic's career, it's not, oh, I had a realization. It's, oh, this, and it's a whole constellation, but you can't stop. You can't stop. That's what makes us alcoholics. It doesn't matter how many times you realize it. It won't stop. It's hard to describe to people who have not been through it what it is like to not be in control and to turn to a substance, even though you know it won't help. You know that it will end in disaster. It's not fun, and also there is a time when you think, oh, I can control it this time, and I went through that as well. But when you're deep enough in the disease, it's not, oh, I have the fantasy in my head that I can drink and it'll be okay. It's, I don't care if it's okay or not. I really need to drink. And I don't know. I hope, I am glad there are not many people that understand that. As frustrating as it can be to try and explain it to people and know they don't understand, that is good that you don't understand.
Yeah, that's a good perspective.
Wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Where have you come so far in resolving this for you?
It's still very much a work in progress. I think, I had a very tough divorce, and COVID was bad for the podcasting industry, and I'm a writer, and that has not been an industry that's been growing. And I mentioned before, there's been an inflection point in my life where the outside registers of my success have not been as easy to look to. They're still there. I need to not discount myself. I need to recognize that I'm actually still very successful. I'm just not, it's easier. It doesn't feel as easy to point to stuff and be like, see that gold star and that gold star and that gold star. And that, I think actually the divorce forced me to reckon with my relationship with my mom in a way that I hadn't since she died.
How so? Say more.
I was married to an alcoholic and not sober. And my mom died, and he just slid into the place of the person I tried to take care of and the person I tried to please. I was 13 again.
When did you realize this?
Oh, while we were getting divorced.
Yeah.
And then the metaphor I've used sometimes is I put him in front of, I had all this mom stuff, piled away in a closet, and I put him in front of the door of the closet.
What a great metaphor.
And then he hightailed it out of there, and all of that stuff came pouring out of the closet. And it was very easy for me to recognize that the depth of grief I was feeling wasn't just about him. That it was impossible that it could be just about him.
Talk about all the therapies that you've had to try to help you resolve some of these issues.
So I did a lot in 2023 to try and work through this. Some somatic stuff. I did a retreat. I did a women's spiritual somatic retreat. And I did ketamine therapy. And the ketamine therapy was amazing on two fronts. One is, several fronts. One is the very first thing that happened was I realized how much tightness I'd been carrying in my body. The actual feeling of the ketamine hitting my system, which is just it's a dissociative, right? You kind of leave your body, and I had this sensation of oh, I have been just physically tied up in knots for years. And then the other thing is was a very powerful antidepressant, temporary for me. Mm-hmm. It wound up not having but such a relief to even have a week, 2 weeks, a month of freedom from those dark thoughts. I had this one experience where in the, ketamine experience, I had a feeling of letting go of a building and falling backwards, knowing I wouldn't die, but just whatever. Nothing makes real sense, right? But something about that, I left, I was in the Uber because you can't drive yourself. And the thought that came to me was, I have worked so hard to not die the way my mother died, but have I done the work to not live the way that she lived?
Explain to our listeners what ketamine therapy is, if you would.
Sure. So it's available in a lot of different ways, and I will be honest, I have opinions about some of them in relationship to long-term sobriety. Everyone gets to make their own choice, right? My choice, which was done in conversation with my therapist, in conversation with the psychiatrist, and in conversation with my sponsor and other trusted sober people, was that I was in a place where nothing else had worked. And in fact, I had started this exercise regimen that was probably ultimately not good for me, trying everything, right? And I remember my sponsor said, you got to do what's going to save your life. And so I'm really glad I had 13 years of sobriety under my belt by the time I went. And I have to say, I'm glad that I had that. But at the same time, I know people who could probably benefit very early in sobriety because that, treatment-resistant depression is a killer, as you know. So what I did was, in the clinic, I did intravenous ketamine infusion with someone there, with a therapist present, and, under a schedule of I think it's, once a week, then every other week, then every 3 weeks, and then once a month. And then I haven't had it in a long time now, although I'm thinking about going off for a top-up. To my mind, as an intellectualizer, ketamine therapy cut to the chase in a way that talk therapy can't.
Thank you for explaining that. I think that will help. And I think what's important that you're saying is you made this decision with a lot of your experts around you, with your resources around you, and did this therapy under the supervision of people who were trained to do this.
It's so much better to do it in conversation, and especially for someone with any kind of history of addiction. I also tried to stay really honest about it, keep in touch with my sponsor, keep in touch with my therapist.
And you have a powerful perspective too on where you're at and where you've been and where you've come. So how are you right now managing the depression and the bipolar?
I'll go into some 12-step talk to say I'm managing by not managing. My life is unmanageable, right? The first step, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and admitted we were powerless over alcohol. And I'm powerless over my various diseases. I am powerless over politics. I am powerless over my dog. I in rehab, they always talk about the hula hoop. I'm sure you're familiar. Like that's all I got.
Yeah.
And what I try to do is stay in that hula hoop and practice next right thing. And it gets easier or harder depending on my willingness to let go of all the stuff that I can't control. And today, talking to you, I'm having a good day. I went to a meeting first thing this morning. I got a chance to write in my journal. Today's a Mondays, or I try to create like a real soft space for myself, and they turn out really good.
That's
And
nice.
tomorrow may be different. And that's another thing that is hard. One is the ability to say it may be different, it may be worse. But then the day after that will be different as well. And that is something that I've hung on to ever since I got sober, but very particularly more and more over these past really hard 4 years, is I don't know what tomorrow brings, and there's a gift in that.
I really appreciate you being vulnerable and opening up your story to us. Thank you so much for being here.
And thank you so much for this platform. I think being able to tell these stories is really important, so I appreciate you giving me the space to do that.
Besides her own writing, Marie Cox is a writing instructor. She leads workshops designed to help people write about the experiences they've had, to reframe the stories they tell about themselves. You can learn more about that at annamariecox.com. So ketamine therapy is often being studied for treatment-resistant depression and suicidality, as well as anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and some chronic pain conditions. This should always be performed in a controlled, supervised clinical setting, and several administration methods are available that you can always talk to your doctor about. The other thing that I wanted to just point out was I was really glad that Anna brought up parentification. This is a really common experience among children who are being raised by parents who are alcoholics. And I thought she did a really nice way of describing exactly how it feels as a child who's going through this. And I wanted to further clarify that it's different than just a child having a lot of responsibilities. There's certainly nothing wrong with children having, chores, having responsibilities, when parents have some really good, high expectations for their kids, when kids are working hard, and sometimes in families, kids need to contribute more to a family in the case of a death of somebody or single parenting and so forth. The difference with parentification is the level of responsibility is so high that a child is essentially taking care of a parent or parents, so that not only they're taking care of their parents emotionally, psychologically, even a lot of times physically. Where the child has to worry about the whereabouts of the parent. They have to worry about the parent getting about, getting to work. That's really what the parentification is. And so if you recognize Anna's experiences in your life or others' lives, I would recommend doing some more research on that. Therapy, there's a lot of really great therapy out there for addressing parentification. And I would also recommend looking up Al-Anon groups, which are groups specifically for children who have been raised by parents who are alcoholics. In This Family is produced by John Moe, and the music is provided by Jeremy Messersmith. You can learn more about Nexus by visiting nexusfamilyhealing.org. Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, I hope you recommend In This Family to your family and friends. Post about us on social and leave a rating or review. I'm Dr. Michelle K. Murray. See you next time.